So welcome to the Martyn's Law webinar. My name is Natalie Smith. I am here on behalf of Active Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and we are here to give this presentation to you in order to give an update on something that's obviously really important about safety around events. So the Active Partnerships, they are a national organisation. There's 42 national partnerships, and part of our purpose is to work to tackle inequalities around places in England, and we work within Sport England, uniting the movements to help tackle inequalities, to work with projects to support people to reduce inactivity and increase physical activity for health benefits. So we work with lots of partners to do that, and if you're interested in that, you can see more on our website, activehw.co.uk. So we are here today to give this webinar for you with Duncan and Kevin. They're really passionate, and you'll find out why when they do their introductions, about sharing this information on quite a complex area, which is why we've put this on to try and help people, particularly in the sport and physical activity arena. We've had lots of questions in advance. We'll do our best to answer those through the presentation and through the Q&A at the end, but obviously we can't do every eventuality, so we will be focused more on sort of sport and physical activity events based on the nature of what we do in our region in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and supporting those beyond. So I will hand over. I do want to just say before I go any further, the slides will be shared with you, so there is lots of information on the slides. We will share that with you, and the recording will be available. However, we do have to caveat that this is as it stands at the time, so you will need to do your due diligence and make sure that you look at the different sort of websites, the government websites and guidance as updates occur, and Kevin will be sharing that with you throughout, and there will be resources that we can signpost you to that will hopefully help you with that. So I will be handing over to, I think Duncan's going to go first with the introductions, and then Kevin will come in and introduce himself. So big thank you to both Duncan Sutcliffe and Kevin Purcell for giving up their time to share this update with you. So I will hand over to you now. Thank you.
And let's move on to the first slide, please. Okay, great to see you all. My name's Duncan from Sutcliffe & Co. We're insurance brokers, and we've got a sister company called Man Broadbent who specialise in insurance for the sport, dance and leisure sector. I'm going to give you a quick background into Martyn's Law, and then I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who's far more intelligent and better looking than me, to take you through the nitty gritty. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the reason you're here is because of Martyn's Law, which is the new act which came into place last year, which is asking organisations to take seriously the threat of terrorism. But you shouldn't look at it just narrowly at the world of terrorism. It's the risk improvements and thinking that goes into Martyn's Law will make your events safer and better for many other reasons. And you can think of the awful things that happened in Southport in 24 and Nottingham in 23. They weren't necessarily terrorist attacks in their nature as by the letter of the law, but the things that we're thinking about today may have prevented or reduced the impact of them. And we can think of things that more recently, there was the attack on the synagogue in Manchester very recently, and only last month the running race called the Spine, one of the competitors had to be withdrawn from the race because there was an active threat against her because she had raised money for Afghan women's charity, and there was a real threat against her during that event. So that was one individual that was threatened, but the thinking of risk improvements is very relevant. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so the background, you will probably remember the awful terrorist attack on the Ariana Grande concert in the Manchester Arena in 2017. 22 people killed, including a young chap called Martyn, and his mum campaigned to improve awareness and response to terrorist threats, which is why we have now got Martyn's Law. And the powers that be looked into this particular incident, and they also looked into things like the attacks on Borough Market and Fishmongers Hall, and realised that had different procedures and practices been in place and responses been different, then maybe the terrorist attack would not have been able to happen, or if it did happen, the consequences wouldn't have been so severe. So they've come through with Martyn's Law with an attempt to raise awareness and reduce the risks of terrorist attacks and the consequences. And the next slide, please. So what is Martyn's Law? In simple terms, the law came into effect in April last year, although the government have given a sort of 2-year period of grace to allow organisations to get their ducks in a row so they're ready for what is likely to be April 2027 for it to come into place. And what they're looking at is organisations and individuals to ensure that they consider terrorism as part of their normal risk assessments. And if you operate a venue, the chances are that in most cases the venue operator will be responsible. But if you're hiring a venue, that doesn't mean that you can just slope your shoulders. You will have responsibilities too. Premises will fall into scope in most cases. So this could range from shops, hotels, churches, schools, university campuses, where there's 200 or more people present at any one time. So that does take in a lot of venues. There will be certain excluded venues, but most of us who are on this call will be relevant to. And an event would be where there's 800 or more people in a venue or a location. So this could be open spaces such as parkland, festivals and so forth. But ordinarily this is where there is controlled access. So if you think of something like a music festival, there will be ticketed or gated access, which would bring this into scope rather than just a wide open playing field. And if I hand over now to Kevin, he'll take you through the details.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Natalie. So my name is Kevin Purcell. I've I'm retired from law enforcement in a senior position in 2020. I've been working in on this and other projects that try and keep people, places and locations sort of safe, if you like. We do a lot of security work on a strategic basis. We've worked all around the world, and this is something of particular interest. You'll have noticed the date of May 17 when the Manchester Arena bombing took place. You'll be aware that that's the 10-year anniversary just after April 27. So you can imagine that Fegan Murray, who's very active in this and has got the ear of the Home Office and is a passionate, quite rightly, person in terms of representing people, she will be keen to make sure that there's no slippage on that. So one of the questions we often get asked is this likely to be sort of kicked into the long grass? Is it likely to disappear? It's not likely to disappear. So moving forward, you can see this is just a visual of how you need to look at things. So first of all, if you're below 200, you're not subject to Martyn's Law. However, many of the things that we spoke about, Duncan mentioned the nursery, we have isolated incidents. A lot of this within the overall measures, particularly the 200 to 799, makes sense for any business to tighten up what they do. We've read on various different bits of academia that anyone that's subject to an attack like this is likely to be closed within 18 months because of the reputational issues and the problems, the cost, the insurance, the public inquiry. Where this takes us to in particular is there's so many places in play: place of worship, childcare, primary, secondary, further education. They will remain a standard regardless of what event is going on by definition, but the rest you can see where they fall. 200 to 799 standard, and 800 plus as an enhanced duty premises. And next, please, Natalie. Okay, practical examples. Some of them are straightforward. You will be interested, I'm sure, as everyone that I've done a presentation to so far is the peculiarities for your event. But a standard duty premises hosting a large paid event, 800 plus people. You could imagine that, and a good example would be a theme park or a festival, as Duncan mentioned, something whereby there is significant numbers of people attending, and premises hosting smaller paid events under 800 is more likely to be, obviously schools are covered by this, but they're more likely to be small events. I am involved in a rugby club locally in Worcestershire. There will probably be more than 200 people there most Saturday afternoons within the bar, within the curtilage of the premises, and it's paid to get in there, so that would be covered. Events on non-qualifying premises with over 800 people, that is where, for example, it's a open area, and here's an example, and it's not on this year, so I could cover it. The War Memorial Park in Coventry, it's an open place. But yes, normally they have every year the cadaver event, whereby then it becomes an enclosed venue and people are going in there and there's ticketed, and it's more organised. So that then becomes a qualifying event. A paid or ticketed event on non-qualifying premises that reasonably expects 800 plus attendees at one time will be treated as a qualifying event. Public protection procedure measures must be implemented for the duration, and events on other land, you can see where that is. The farmland, festival sites, they are also covered as well. Next slide, please, Natalie. So the standard, this is up to 200 to 799, looks at 4 very, very straightforward measures. They are evacuation, evacuation, that should read, communication, and lockdown. They are very, very simple procedures, and they talk about how you get people out of the premises if there's an issue, how you bring them into the premises if there's an issue, how you communicate with your own staff and the emergency services. And lockdown is almost within a building, how you would try and secure people if somebody's at one entrance and you want to bring them in and lock them down. They are quite straightforward. The complexities are around because they all apply differently to every venue. So on top of those, there are public protection procedures required for enhanced duty premises. Now these may include, and the list will be vast depending on the type of enhanced duty premises you are. So I mean, can you have monitoring, e.g. staff deployment, surveillance systems, access and movement measures, you know, your queuing arrangements, physical safety and security measures, secure doors, barriers, information security measures, secure handling of plans, procedures and sensitive data, and staff training. Do your staff understand indicators of terrorism and what to do in these instances? And I'll talk about some of the places you can find more information on as we go along. One of the questions that's always asked is, do I have to do these, and what is reasonable and proportionate? It's very, my experience, having been involved in reviews of policing activity that has been done 3 years later, what looked reasonable to you at the time can look anything but reasonable if something's gone seriously wrong. The things that inquiries look for is, have you made decisions? Have you articulated the decisions, and have you recorded them? So the minimum that's expected for everyone that's covered by Martyn's Law is that you've thought about it, that you've recorded what you've thought about, and you've recorded why you've done what you've done and why you haven't done what you've done. So the thing about proportionality means that if somebody comes along and tells you that it'd be good for you to buy a CCTV system that's going to cost you £40,000 to cover all of your premises, any outbuildings, the fencing, the gates, the whole thing, and you turn over a couple of £1,000 a year and only have 200 visitors, that is not proportionate. But you do need to all the time have done the due diligence around what is reasonable and proportionate. So we know there'll be any number of organisations that will tell you that you need to buy lots of equipment to make your event or your premises safe. There needs to be a proper, one of the things about doing a risk assessment, and Duncan will cover that shortly, is that you've considered that and you rule it in and you rule it out. What the government have made clear is you shouldn't have to spend silly money trying to make yourself safer than you need to be, but you do have to properly consider what is proportionate and why you make the decisions you do. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned that compliance ready. I've mentioned that May next year is the anniversary of 10 years. April, bearing in mind the Act's been in for since 25. We're waiting on further guidance from the SIA and other government sources as to what this will look like. The things that we're saying to people that are the most important at this moment in time. First one is understand your current position. Do a review of where you are at the moment and be brutal, if you like, to your own organisation and look at where the real vulnerabilities are. There will be no hiding place if you just ignore things. That is not the way forward here. You need to understand by doing a gap analysis on exactly where you are. Review your gap analysis, your risk assessment findings, and choose practical proportionate options to reduce risk. There may be multiple solutions with different costs. The most expensive isn't always the best. We've just done a piece of work with a leisure park on the coast, and because of the number of people they had coming in, and they wanted to consider putting something in around the gates that allowed or prevented anyone just driving a big vehicle or anything straight in. For them, there was costings talked to them about all sorts of measures around vehicle mitigation. What they actually did, because they were on the coast, they bought 3 or 4 big anchors and just dropped them down almost as in front of the gates as something to look at that people had photographs with and so on and so forth. But they did the job. So you don't always have to go with a really expensive solution. You have to think about what you need to do and why you're doing it, and most importantly, record what you considered and why you chose a particular approach. There's various ways of dealing with risk, and those of you, and many of you will do, who do risk assessments regularly, will be that you can treat the risk by just ignoring it. You can treat the risk and do nothing, or you can put mitigation in. There's various ways of dealing with risk, but for whatever you do, you must make sure that you've done your best to treat the risk. And one of the key things is, and the Manchester Arena showed this, that your staff need to know what's expected of them and what they've got to do. Now, there are not many organisations, and I know there'll be security people on here, that employ SIA trained staff all the time. If you do that for a particular event, the staff normally will come with their own training, but that still doesn't mitigate making sure your own staff, whether they be on selling tickets, selling food, know what to do if something happens. So you need to make sure that in treating the risks, you understand what, and everybody in your team needs to know exactly what's expected of them. Is your signage correct? Is there a way of getting people in and out the premises? All of these things will come into how you treat your risks. Then once you've done that, you've really got to bear in mind that compliance is not a one-off exercise. Once you've done this, you can't say, oh, I've done my risk assessment, that's it. So for example, if I used a cathedral, the cathedral might normally have 150 people turning up for a service. There might only be that number of people in regularly. But then if they have, and a number of the cathedrals now do this, have a concert at the cathedral, there may be 250, 300 people, 1,000 people there. So you cannot just do it as a one-off, and you need to take into account that your staff change, that your layout might change, you might be hosting a different type of event. So you need to become into a way of thinking that you would be in the way of thinking that you do your risk assessments for health and safety, that you reevaluate them, and you can't park them. You've got to make sure you revisit them. And next slide, please, Natalie. These are things that we know are commonly overlooked. Time to compliance. If you imagine that we're within 14 months of people needing to be compliant, if businesses, if their budget starts in April, they need to put aside some money. I know the Home Office will say it doesn't cost anything to do this, it shouldn't cost. There's a likelihood that there will be some cost. It might not be massive, but you do need to think about how you're going to do it. And you do need to give yourself time to do the risk assessment, the gap analysis, plan training, get some budget available, so that even if it's something where you need to train your staff more, or you need simple measures, or you need to get greater advice, you need to get that into your compliance. You need to, and I've mentioned this, many organisations struggle to survive the aftermath of a serious incident. Business Improvement Districts report that around 80% of organisations go out of business within 2 years of a critical incident. That isn't just terrorism, that's where things happen and things go dramatically wrong. Staff confidence, we could talk about, and they are a good example. When you employ SIA trained staff, the people that they work for will have given them the vetting, and they will have done some training with them. This is also about volunteers. That many organisations thrive and work well and have volunteers, but those volunteers will have little or no knowledge around what their responsibility is. So it's making sure that the staff that you employ and any volunteers are given the confidence by having appropriate training highlighted to them, by pointing them to doing some very simple government ProtectUK training at one end. There'll be a need for more if they are, if your organisation is falling into the enhanced venue, because it's a more complex position. But there are a number of easy to do things that you could start to do, and we'll touch on some of them at the end. And then you need to look at not what you think is reasonable. And some of the pre-questions for this that I've seen is, what happens if I'm told that oh, we don't want to do that, we don't need to do this? There's a responsibility for everyone that's employed on this to make sure they get their bit right. Interestingly, and I think we'll touch on this later, there is now responsibility in law that's more than a financial risk to decision makers, to board members, and to senior people who are involved in managing locations, that they will have a personal responsibility for getting this right. So they'll have to pay due diligence to it. And the other thing that's really crucial, and I can say this from a life spent having many of my decisions reviewed over serious incidents, the most important thing is that you have policies, you record the decisions under those, and you record why you've done it. It's not enough just to say, I'm not going to put security in. You need to put why you're not going to do it and what mitigation you're going to do if you don't take an action, or record why you're doing the action that you do take. Thanks, Natalie. Duncan.
You're on mute, Duncan.
Better? Okay, you weren't missing much. So as Kevin said, it's crucial that you record things, because after an incident, if something has gone wrong, you need to prove that you've done what you're expected to. And this is not just in relation to Martyn's Law. This is all sorts of things that me as an insurance broker I see, whether it's trips and slips, you name it. If it goes to court, they want to look at the paperwork. So most of us are involved with sport and leisure because we like sport and leisure, but the reality is sport and leisure is all paperwork. So you need to do your risk assessments, but don't be frightened of them if you've not done them before. And I'll explain through what you need to do here. So there's great advice on the HSE website, and if you've not done risk assessments before, I encourage you to go there. It's really user friendly, and a risk assessment is quite logical, really. We do risk assessments when we cross the road. But this is putting it into writing, and as Kevin said, you're sort of justifying why you've thought that way. So you need to identify what the hazards are, assess the risks, and then how you're going to control that risk if that's relevant. And then you record those findings in your risk assessment, and then you review them as relevant. So if things change, you would review those. And of course, you need to communicate the findings of your risk assessment to your volunteers and staff so they know what they should and shouldn't be doing under certain circumstances. And Natalie, if we move on to the next slide, I'll give you a quick example here, short and sweet, of a risk assessment that may be a small event such as a village fete or a bonfire night, may be held at a cricket ground, in your local cricket ground or your local pub garden or wherever it is, holding this event, and they're thinking, right, what are the hazards? And keeping it in the subject of terrorism, maybe a vehicle ram raid. They do happen. We saw one not so long ago in Germany, and we saw the case in Manchester at the football celebrations. So how are we going to avoid that? So who might be harmed and how? Well, the members of the public and staff would be hurt. What's already in place? Well, the pub garden where the bonfire night is has got a perimeter fence all the way around it, except at one point where there's a gate. So we've got perimeter fence, so that's good. What we're going to do about the gate? Well, we're going to keep that entrance barrier closed and manned, so we'll make sure we've got a volunteer there, and there will be a need for people to get through. The ice cream van and the burger van need to get through, but we need to check that they're expected, and so the person manning that knows who to expect, and the person manning that has got a radio, a walkie-talkie, to talk to whoever's in charge. Who's in charge of manning the gate? Well, you've allocated a gate marshal. And when do you need this action to be put in place by? Well, you need to make sure that the gate is manned from a certain time, and that between certain hours only vehicles that are allowed in and out would be emergency vehicles, that the ice cream van can't just come and go when he wants. So you've thought through and you've recorded, particular incidents, and you've recorded it, and it's there in writing should something go wrong, and it's there to communicate with the volunteers and employees. So you would just run through this for various other eventualities to create a series of risk assessments, and then when you're not doing a bonfire night, maybe it's a fete, you'd make slight amendments, and make sure you communicate those. So risk assessments are nothing to be frightened of if you've not done them before. Okay, Natalie, if we move on and back to Kevin.
So some of the things that we're keen to do is there's various guidance out there, and I'll include the official ones that are really good sources of information: ProtectUK, government.uk, and the National Protective Security Authority. That's where the source of all the information comes. It's vast. There's we've created a library, an AI searchable library of all of this documentation. It numbers over 240 documents, and they're not page documents. They're many pages. So there's a vast amount of information. We are all waiting for the latest guidance that's due any time, and that's, I know some of the pre-questions said, when's the latest guidance? The latest guidance is out any time. Our information is things won't change dramatically because the law's been passed, the information's all in there, and the key things are about recording decisions. So that's really in there. You'll see, and you'll see that we've got a as we go on to the next page after this, there is or the final page, there is 3 QR codes. The central one will take you to many blogs that we've written over the last 18 months around this, as we've come to terms with what's happening. And also on there is the offer of half an hour's free consultation with us to talk to you about this. The middle one of those is the most important. And we've created, and it is a bit of a sell, but I don't want to get into it too much. We'll talk to you outside of here if you want to talk to us more. But we've created an app that will allow you to record everything and keep changing it, time, date, stamps it, and make sure everybody's informed. But the most important one is the Scan Me. Is the central one here, where it allows you to get into all our blogs and have a look at things, and we're able to give greater advice if you want it. But we are very aware that we're working on the basis that yes, we do charge for advice if we do a lot of advice. However, we try and create a situation where we stop you having to spend lots of money you don't have to spend on things that you don't really need because you've bought them because you've just got worried. Now, the number one thing that we would say as an organisation, and we've spoken to many groups now, and that is this, that most people are just worried. That's the key thing. They don't know what they should do. They don't know how to apply the logical way of doing things. And as I say, if you do want to speak, you'll see a link on the central one of them if you scan it to talk to us for half an hour for some free consultation. Duncan's details are on there, and mine indeed, and you can come to either of us for anything that you would require else in terms of, obviously, Duncan's insurance and mine is around protecting your people, your venue and your visitors. Please get in touch. And I think we're on to any questions now, I think, Natalie, aren't we?
Yeah, thank you both so much. Yeah, so really interesting kind of whistle stop tour. As I said, the slides will be shared with everyone, so I'm sure you know, you can go back and have a look at that. I am going to take this slide down in a minute, so if you do want to scan any of the QR codes, then please do that now before I take that down, and we will go into the Q&A session. I think it's been really insightful, and as Kevin and Duncan said, there is information out there, and we will share some of the documentation from the Home Office as a Mythbusters, as well as something that United Outcomes have agreed that we can share with the flowchart and some of the stuff that you've seen on the slide. So thank you so much for that. If anyone has got a Q&A question that hasn't kind of been covered or hasn't already been asked in advance, then please do pop that in the Q&A box. But I am just going to come out of the presentation for a moment, and then we can look and see what, if anything, people are asking. Shall we go through some of the questions that have been asked in advance that may not have been covered? Okay, so we have actually got some stuff in the Q&A, and actually it might be helpful maybe just to go with that one first, if you're okay, and then we'll come to the pre-asked ones. So we've got Emma asking, what if your event is on an open site, and does this apply to free events? So I guess in terms of some of the potential contacts, for example, if there was a sports-based event and it was in the outside grounds of a leisure centre, so there is a premises, there is a building for the leisure centre, but apart from going in to use the toilets, it would be probably more outside. On the sort of outside racetrack, so the young people might not have paid to actually go to that event, but there may have been some hire of the venue by the organisers, and there's probably more than 800 there, or maybe there's sort of 650. Where would that kind of fall within the Act?
Okay, so But first and foremost, there's the way you've described it there. We've got something that's enclosed because there's fencing around there. There's car parking. There's a building on the premises, and there is an event taking place. So in terms of the responsibility will be joint. It will sit with those organising the event and those owning the premises to come up with measures that protect people from within there. If I just move on from there, because one of the things that often comes up is the classic park run, where people just turn up and go for a run. It's in, and I can only use locations that I know locally. Often it's literally people pull up at the side of the road, park up, and there's a certain amount of organisations for a run. There's no fee paid for doing it, or there's people just go for a run if you like. That sort of event in open parkland is not covered by this. As soon as you get into a more organised event where it's ticketed, organised, it's within a venue, then you start falling into Martyn's Law. And that's where you do have to do a proper consideration of what is taking place and the risks. Now, you would be doing that risk assessment, I would imagine, if you were holding an event anywhere, because you'd obviously not want people taking place if the ground was sodden and there'd be a risk, and you'd be doing all of these things all along. You just have to add in a more detailed risk assessment based around terrorism and Martyn's Law.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think based on what you said kind of at the start, and is if that was the case, there's probably some elements, thinking back to Duncan's risk assessment, that you could do as a good practice anyway. So again, if there's a gate, having a person there with the security, working out about who can kind of go in and out in terms of like just the first aiders or that sort of timing. So I guess there'd probably be some things that you could just mitigate, and letting the staff know what they could do and the volunteers know what they could do in the briefing in terms of the training and in an emergency anyway. Would that be?
Very much so. And the number one thing you're looking for is who is in control, who is the responsible person for this event, because the legislation goes back to that again and again and again. And you need to make sure that that person, first and foremost, knows they're responsible. It's no good having a committee meeting and the person that hasn't turned up at that meeting gets the job of being in charge of it and they know nothing about it. They need to be the responsible person, and they need to see and make sure the plans are signed off and that they're happy with them. And I think that's the number one thing that the government are looking to achieve, in my opinion. It is just my opinion, is to make sure there is a responsible person who is taking charge of all the people that are attending and looking after them.
Brilliant. And you mentioned as well that there was some training that would apply more to the standard. There's like an online video. Maybe we can share the link with the recording for people to access that.
Yeah, if you go on to ProtectUK, there's things on there that are very straightforward that talk about how an individual who was at an event, and it's useful to do even if you're not anywhere near Martyn's Law. It talks about what they do, how they hide, how they report, how they, very basic actions that all your volunteers would be really well blessed to go and do even before you get anywhere near the compliance for this, because it will protect them, and we all want to look after our staff and our visitors.
Absolutely. And these could, we're talking about terrorism events, but we've had events that have been disrupted by events that could be similar to this. And Kevin talks about telling your people what to look out for. These could be criminals. We had a running race that we insured which had to be stopped because one of the participants was sadly sexually assaulted during the event, but the response and the reaction to it was very much in line to had there been a terrorist attack. So it's good practice to think about these kind of things that could go wrong.
Yeah. And I guess everyone here wants their participants participants to be safe, and that's the main thing that they can look into. Okay, thank you. Right, let's have a look then. So some of the questions that you've had in advance, and we've just had a couple more in. So we've ticked off the information from the regulators. The where do I start? I think you nicely kind of covered that off with the grid, with the kind of doing the gap kind of analysis and the risk assessment, and the steps that you can ensure that you're compliant. What about, we have quite a lot of, and I think it was mentioned there about the rugby club that or any other kind of clubs. Quite often there's like a business element to it now, where there might be parties or hiring out venues. So in terms of the third party events or event organisers that are bringing things to your premises, is that the joint responsibility, or is there anything else you can add briefly on that?
I can give you an example that would talk about a rugby club, which you can read football club or cricket club for that. I'm aware of a rugby club that hired out their whole premises for a concert, for a festival venue, and they signed off that for the purpose of the times between 8 a.m. on one day and midnight 2 days later, that the venue was going to be hired out as a full venue. That belongs to the event organizer then, because there is clear a contractual agreement that it's all been handed over to a third party to run the premises and to look after everything. That's reasonably straightforward. The ones that become more difficult, or they're probably not more difficult, but need more consideration, is a rugby club or a football club might be a private members club or a cricket club, but then somebody's having a 21st or a wedding in the club and the grounds. They're hiring out part of the premises to the individual, so the owners of the premises, the rugby club, will have responsibility for that event. What they will also do, though, is make sure that anyone attending the event who isn't just a visitor, so any caterers or any, is briefed around the security measures and what they should do if they see something going wrong. So there will be a joint responsibility there. Similarly, people have brought up, if I can move into this, things around when you've got a security team visiting. The venue still own so at nightclubs or pubs who bring in security staff, in effect, the club, the pub or the event have shown a degree of diligence because they've recognised they want to bring in security staff. It's still their event, but they need to check on the training of the security staff, and they need to make sure that they're liaising with security teams to make sure they're getting staff that have had a degree of Martyn's Law training, or they need to offer that themselves. Now, I'm pretty certain by the time this gets to compliance that the SIA will have put modules out for what I would colloquially call door staff or gate staff, to make sure that they've got relevant knowledge, understanding, and good security firms who you're trying to employ. That will be a question that you'll be asking them. Have your teams had Martyn's Law training, and can you show that so that we can include it in our risk assessment?
Brilliant, thank you. And I think probably just taking away from that, regardless of if you're the event owner, the premises owner, or you're running an event, that best practice would be the communication in, have you done a risk assessment? Can you see a risk assessment? Communication about how people have been briefed to then know what to do from kind of either side is probably is that a good practice to have those conversations?
Most certainly, and most football clubs, cricket clubs and rugby clubs will have a albeit most of them, or could be cast clubs, the charity side, most of them will have a board, they'll have a chairman, a secretary, and they will have responsibility in law for their premises and what events they put on. So that responsibility in law will still exist and just be added to under Martyn's Law. So it shouldn't be a new concept to people who are on committees.
And collaboration is very important. One of the key things they pulled out of the Ariana Grande concert was the lack of collaboration and coordination between the venue and the various subcontractors at the venue, and then the authorities like the police, ambulance and fire. So where you've got large-scale events, well-run events, there will be a lot of collaboration and coordination.
Brilliant. Can I just clarify, SIA, is that the Security Industry Authority? Is that what it stands for?
Yeah, and it's the people that license, as I would say, back in my day, they were called bouncers. They're not called that anymore. They're called door staff and gate staff and many other CCTV operators and everything. So it depends on your age whether you've got, but they are, and that's, again, if you're bringing people in and paying them, you definitely want to make sure that you're bringing people that are in terms of badged. So anyone that you bring in, don't do security on the cheap, or if you do, explain why you have. Make sure that you've got people who are suitably trained, and that's not, I've got no interest in any SIA business or anything like that. That's just making sure that there won't come along a load of new people saying I can do your security without being badged and without having insurance, because the SIA companies all have the relevant insurance.
Yeah, and they tend to wear something on their arm which has actually got the thing on, I think.
So that's what I would call
Yeah, that's
badge.
like the badge. Yeah, so they've got a license that they meet and they comply with all the regulations officially. Yeah, excellent. Okay, right. Let's see. We've got some ones around. So as a sport league delivering events in large arenas, where's the responsibility? Is it the arena for the public and the promoter for the participants and staff and volunteers?
It's at the very outset, you should be sitting down and talking about, as I gave the thing there, are you hiring the whole arena? Are you hiring the track? Are the arena staying there because they're getting all the food and the any drinks, alcohol being sold? Or is it being hired out as a whole venue? And the two are very different. The one thing that's really important is you've both got to sit down together, do the collaboration, and make sure that you agree who is the responsible person for that event. So it's an event on premises, so you may end up with somebody who's responsible for the premises overall, but you may end up with a responsible person for the event itself. So it is all about talking to each other. And what there will not be is the scope for people to say, like the Chuckle Brothers, from me to you, to you to me. It will have to be properly recorded, and it will have to be clear decision making based on the circumstances of the event.
Brilliant. Without getting too much into kind of data protection, but just in light of you saying if there was inquiries, is it a usual kind of, is there a best practice of how long to keep it? Is it like the business records, like 6 years, or what?
Well, in terms of risk assessment, if you bear in mind if something happens, they'll be looking at this. If you look at Hillsborough, for example, 30 years later, they're looking. So if your risk assessments, they're normal business records, I would suggest. But if something happens, you'll be expected to secure them and keep them. And that goes back to this is a bit of a sell, but I don't want to go too near it. But you do need a mechanism for recording it, date stamping it, and making sure that it's kept online and safe. In my opinion, having bits of paper floating around is not the way that we now do business. So there are different ways of doing that, and there are apps that will do that, one of which we do, but when that's something for later down the road. But you must again,
yeah, this is not just about Martyn's Law. You could have slips and trips and other things that happen, and they've got a really long tail to them. So an employee could claim 10, 20, 30 years into the future if they're injured. An adult has 3 years to make a claim for an injury. A child has 3 years from the time they reach the age of 18 to make an injury. So there can sometimes be a burden to keep paperwork for a long time.
Thank you. I think hopefully that's useful for people. Okay, let's have a quick one maybe. Can you clarify that the 800 number relates to people at any one time?
First of all, it replies at any one time. However, and this is where we need to be careful that people don't try and create a narrative that isn't really there. So, for example, if you are going to ask for a license to do a festival and you're expecting up to 5,000 people, you're going to be hard pushed to say, well, I only thought there'd be 800 there at any one time because people come and go. You need to look at the entirety of the event and be sensible about it. So if for example, you were at an arena, and if you imagine some of the big Commonwealth or the Olympic Games, you have a morning session, an afternoon session, an evening session, and people are kicked out in effect before people come back in, you could justify setting a number on there. But if you've got an open event and it's going to be more than 800 people, now bearing in mind you need to count the staff that are on the premises, you need to count people that are visiting, you need to count vendors, and you need to count any security you've got in or people delivering things. So you won't get away, and I'm not suggesting anyone's saying that, but you need to err on the side of being cautious with it, because that's what would be expected. And if you said it's only 800 and 5 turn up to do a fire check and there's 1,000 there, you're in trouble anyway because of the use. But we should be working in sensible margins that are reasonable and justifiable in the cold light of day. It was once explained to me when I was in policing that when you're dealing with things, you're looking through a funnel, through the small bit of a funnel, and you're making decisions on the small bit. 5 years later, when things have gone wrong, everyone looking at is looking through the big end of the funnel, and they can see all the things that they think you should have done that you didn't do. So you just need to make sure it's proportionate and you're fair to your organisation, and more importantly, you're protecting your own people and any visitors.
Excellent. One interesting one that's come out that I can imagine with sporting activities and is your advice on. So if there was some kind of sporting event, it would tend to be in like an open park or a field where there wasn't necessarily a building as a premise. What about a marquee? If they've got marquees within does that count as a premises? If it could like house a certain amount of people, or if there's marquees at finish lines of things, what is there anything on that sort of element?
Okay, so first of all, you're talking about the numbers changing slightly if it's an open event. If it's an open event and we're 200 people, it's even with what's going on, it's slightly different. If you are putting a marquee up at £5,000 or £6,000, one would assume that you are, I'm talking about a formal marquee. You're going to need to attract people in to pay for that. You're talking about an organised event, and I think you need to consider it on that basis. If you're putting up and I have seen them where you're putting up at the finish line where people can go in and grab a drink and walk out, a small, eBay market, I think it's slightly different, but it's all about, if you imagine that someone's not going to just ask for your Martyn's Law, they're going to ask for the plans of the event, your committee meeting notes, how many people you're expecting, your marketing plan, all of those things to suggest that you did or didn't know how many people will be going there. So I think that the most important thing is to ensure that you're open and straightforward about what it's going to look like. There will be greater guidance. And again, because I can't give an answer to
yeah, I know
this what does it exactly look like, and that's why I'm saying if you have done the QR code or just email me, I'm quite happy to have half an hour to talk about the peculiarities of your individual event. But it's too difficult to give what ifs on. There'll be 55 different or however many different event type people here.
And the regulation stipulates sort of enclosed areas and premises, but some events spill between them. So I think there's a question there from Alec Good running. Like you've got a running race, something like the Great North Run, you've got an enclosed area at the start for the runners and an enclosed area at the end for the runners, but they're running 13 miles on open streets. So the regulation is focusing on the start area, which is limited access, and the finish area, which is limited access. The open streets may well fall outside that, but I think you would, if something happened in that area that fell outside legislation, fingers would still point at you. So you do need to consider the overall event, whether that's terrorism or something else.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. I think just one last one before we wrap up. There was a question about do the event organisers have to register with the Security Industry Authority, because are they the overseeing, if it meets the, do they have to do that, or?
Yeah, there'll be guidance coming out as exactly how you do that, but you will be expected on guidance at the moment. You'll be expected to, if you are a Martyn's Law premises, you'll be expected to do your risk assessment, your compliance, if you like, regardless of, and I use terms that may change, but you'll be expected to comply and to notify the SIA that you've complied, and you could be the subject of a visit, or you could be asked to send the plans in, or the risk assessment. Again, they're not sure what exactly terms they're going to use to call it a risk assessment. In laypersons, a risk assessment, we're expected to show how you did that, how you put your procedures or measures in place, when you did them, who there was the responsible person, and there may be a check. And we do know that the Health and Safety Executive occasionally do checks. Normally, when things haven't gone right, they'll definitely do a compliance check, but they may just ask for, especially early on, just to check that people have this in place.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we'll leave it there. I hope it's been useful for people in attendance as a kind of a starting point. As I say, there'll be resources to share. A massive thank you to Kevin and Duncan for presenting and for sharing all this information and the resources for us in our network. So thank you for attending the Active Best Practice Network with Event Law planning using Martyn's Law, and I hope you have a great afternoon, and we will send out emails to attendees with the information. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you so much for all of your time.
Thank you.